Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we are going to talk through the process of multiplying decimals, but we're going to be applying a non-calculator method. So there's no calculators allowed for this lesson. Okay, we're going to start off with a basic question just to get an idea of the process of how we are confident with what our final answer should be. So I've started with the question 0.7 times 0.4. At first glance, that looks like quite a tricky question to do mentally, quite a difficult question to do in our heads. Just going to show you the process of how we should approach this question. This is what your working out should look like. So I'm just going to talk you through how I ended up with a result of 0.28. So here's my original question, 0.7 times 0.4. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore these decimal points. So I'm just going to calculate this as if those decimal points were not there. So that leaves me with the question 7 times 4. So rather than 0.7 times 0.4, I'm just working out 7 times 4, which is 28. Once I have my answer here of 28, I then just need to work out where does my decimal point go back into my question, because we removed it at this point to get this calculation, so we need to put it back into our answer. And that's what I've done over here. So if we have a look at the original question, you can see there is 2 digits after the decimal point. The 7 and the 4 come after a decimal point in the question. So because we have 2 digits after the decimal point in the question, I also want 2 digits after the decimal point in my answer, which is why I know the solution, the answer to this calculation has to be 0.28. So you can look at where I've underlined with a red arrow. We have 2 numbers after the decimal point in our question, and we also have 2 numbers after our decimal point in the answer. If I put the decimal point here and made the answer 2.8, then that would be incorrect, because then we'd only have 1 digit after the decimal point. Another way to approach it is you could estimate what you think the answer is going to be. Both of these numbers are less than 1. So I wouldn't be expecting an answer of 2.8. That answer just wouldn't be realistic. It would be too big. It would be larger than what I was expecting. So we can use a little bit of estimation just to double check if we think our answer is going to be correct. But a mathematical way of doing it, look at how many numbers are after the decimal point and ensure it's the same in your answer. So here's my second example, 0.3 times 5. So again, I'm going to approach the question by ignoring the decimal points, removing the decimal points. 0.3 times 5, if I ignore this decimal point, it then becomes 3 times 5, which of course is 15. Now I need to ask myself, where do I put the decimal point back into my answer? If I look at the original question, there is only 1 digit after a decimal point in this question, and it's the 3. So in my answer, I want 1 digit after the decimal point, which is why my answer becomes 1.5. If I was to put the decimal point here and have my answer as 0.15, again, if we estimated this, we want 0.3 multiplied by 5, so I want 3/10 of 5. 0.15 is far too small. It's too little. So we can just ensure we have the correct answer by looking at my red arrows, 1 digit after the decimal point in the question. So we've equaled that, 1 digit after the decimal point in my answer. Okay, so let's have a look at a slightly trickier example. 1.2 times 4.6. So that's what I'm trying to calculate this time. Remember, a non-calculator method. This is what my working out would look like. So if we look at the left-hand side of the screen, I've started with the calculation 1.2 times 4.6. And I've removed the decimal points. I've ignored the decimal points in the question. So I'm ending up calculating 12 times 46. That's going to give me 552. Because we're doing a calculation 2 digits times 2 digits, you will need to show some working out for your multiplication. You may use the grid method of multiplication, like I've used here, or you may be more comfortable with long multiplication. However you do approach it, you need to be showing some working out. I'll just briefly talk you through grid multiplication. What I've done here is I've split the 12 into 10 and 2, tens and units. And I've split the 46 into 40 and 6, tens and units. Then for my 4 blue answers, I've done 4 multiplications. 10 times 40 is 400. 10 times 6 is 60. 2 times 40 is 80. And 2 times 6 is 12. Then I take those 4 answers and I add them together to get 552. So remember, at this point, you may be more comfortable with long multiplication, but I prefer grid method multiplication for ease. Okay, so now I've got my answer, 552. I need to decide where my decimal point goes back into my answer. So if I go to the right-hand side of the screen, if I look at my original question, 1.2 times 4.6, we have 2 numbers after the decimal point. So in my answer, 5.52, again, I have 2 numbers after the decimal point in my answer, 2 digits there. If I go and look at my original question and think of an estimate, if I round this to the nearest whole number, I get 1. And if I round this to the nearest whole number, I get 5. 1 times 5 is very close to this answer. So again, that just confirms that I've put my decimal point back in at the correct place to get an answer of 5.52. In this example, we've got an integer, 24, and we're multiplying it by 5.2. Here's my working out. Looks like this. 24 times 5.2, I'm going to remove this decimal, ignore this decimal, so I'm left with 24 times 52. I work out my multiplication using grid multiplication or long multiplication, a method that you're comfortable with, and I find out that the answer to this multiplication is 1,248. Then if I go ahead and look at my original question, 24 times 5.2, you can see there's 1 digit after the decimal point, which is why I've put my decimal point here to ensure I've got 1 number after my decimal point in my answer. So my final answer looks like this. I'm just going to have a quick estimate to double check. So if I round this to the nearest whole number, I would get 5. And then if I was to do 24 times 5, I'd get 120, which is very close to this answer. If I put my decimal here and had my answer as 12.48, that would be a long way lower than my answer needed to be. So a little estimate will help us confirm that we've put the decimal in at the correct place, 124.8. Last example from me, but bear in mind that you do have the ability to pause the video if you want to have a go at this question yourself before I talk through my solution. Let's have a look at what your working out should look like. Something like this. So I've got the question 0.26 times 3.5. 0.26 times 3.5, here are my decimals. I'm going to remove the decimals, I'm going to ignore them, so I'm left with the calculation 26 times 35. That's going to give me an answer of 910 once I apply grid method multiplication or long multiplication. From there, I need to decide where my decimal point goes back in. If I look at the original question, 1, 2, 3 digits after the decimal point. So I want to have 3 digits after the decimal point in my answer, which means my decimal point goes in front of the 9. So I need to include a 0.910. When I go to actually give my final answer, we can present it as 0.91, because although we've included the 0 here, just to make sure we have a balance of 3 digits and 3 digits, the 0 does not actually affect the value of the number at this point. So we could have wrote our answer like this, but also there is no need for the 0. That would also be appropriate here. So just watch out for questions which end in a 0 after you calculate your multiplication, because your very final answer, you may be able to not include those zeros. So no matter how difficult the question becomes, how complex the question becomes, the method remains the same. Remove the decimals, do the multiplication, put the decimal point back into your answer based on how many numbers after the decimal point in your original question. This leads us to 0.91 in this example. Okay, so now it's your turn to have a go at a few questions. Here is a task for you to have a go at. On the left-hand side of the screen, I've put 6 multiplication questions, and on the right-hand side of the screen, I've put 6 answers to those calculations. What I would like you to do is I'd like you to work out each question, showing me your full working out, showing me your full method. You may have to include grid multiplication or long multiplication to show me how you got your final answer. 5 of these will match up correctly. 1 of them will not match up, and that one is our odd one out. So I'd also like you to highlight the odd one out. Could you pause the video at this point, have a go at all 6 questions, match up those that match up, and highlight the odd one out. Okay, welcome back. I'll just show you my matchings. So my answers look like this. The odd one out was the last question, 1.6 times 7. If we make that 16 times 7, we do get 112, but for this answer, I put the decimal point in at the incorrect place. There is 2 numbers after the decimal point here, and only 1 in the original question. So my answer should have been 11.2. All of the others match up quite nicely. You can see we've got one here which includes 3 values to multiply. 0.2 times 0.7 would give me 0.14, which I could then go ahead and multiply by 0.3. That's going to take me down to 0.042. So just make sure you've got this extra 0 included in your answer here, because we need to ensure we've got 3 digits after the decimal point, which is why this extra 0 is also needed to make sure we have 3 digits after the decimal point in the answer. Very well done if you were able to match those up and identify the odd one out. Another task for you to have a go at. So I've put a set of questions on the screen. For each question, I'd like you to show me your full working out. Can you calculate the answer to each multiplication question? Could you pause the video and have a go at all the questions now? Okay, welcome back. I'll just put up the solutions to these questions. Your answers should have looked something like this. So please use these answers to mark and assess your own work, but also ensure that you've shown me full working out. So there should be some grid multiplication or long multiplication, and there should be some maths showing me how you got from the original question to your answer in each case. Very well done if you were able to get these correct, especially the last three questions where we became a bit more challenging, a bit more complex. Very well done if you've got those correct. You've shown a good understanding of multiplying decimals.